Hi, this is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. Today is December 12th, 12 2023. And it's the end of the day. I got a hell of a shirt on, and I want to talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which is freedom of speech and expression. One of the reasons we created the Midnight Project a long time ago and worked on it for so long and so diligently is this concept called ACE, freedom of association, commerce, and expression, which necessarily requires you to have technology protect and enforce that. And lately, there's been a bit of a conflict. Three university presidents, one from MIT, another from University of Pennsylvania, one from Harvard, came together, and they were asked a question about whether calling for the genocide of a race constitutes harassment against the members of that group. And they said, well, that depends on context, the long and short, which is an extraordinary statement and unto itself. Generally speaking, when one calls for genocide, it's not really a context-related thing. Systematically murdering a group of people does seem to be about harassment. And the broader point is that when you talk about freedom of speech and expression, you have to either take an absolutist view where you say, look, at the end of the day, we're going to let people express their opinions, even if they're horrifically distasteful, or you end up being caught into a maelstrom of, well, it depends. If we like it, it's okay, and we politically agree with it, it's okay. If we disagree with it, it's not. So Harvard, for example, there's an organization called FIRE, which is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. It's an amazing organization, and I'll share the website here for you guys. It's thefire.org, and it's a nonpartisan organization. So it's not a Republican organization. It's not a Democrat organization. It's actually an organization that believes in First Amendment and talks about it. And there's actually a lovely interview from one of the people who's in the hierarchy there, Greg Lukianoff, with Lex Friedman, and I'd highly recommend you take a look at that. Here's a link to that interview with Lex Friedman. But every year they do an index of campuses that support free speech and ones that do not. Harvard had the lowest possible score out of 0 to 100, which is 0, meaning that it is absolutely bereft of freedom of expression. If you go with politics and visions and viewpoints that disagree with the orthodoxy of the mainstream of the campus, you're basically either not invited to speak or shouted down, and the faculty go out of their way to silence or censor you. And usually they label it under things like it's hate speech. What was so extraordinary about the statements of the president of Harvard was that something that was obviously hate speech under any reasonable definition apparently is given a contextual pass. Why? Because the politics get in the way. And it brings up a broader overall point about academia and the state of affairs in the United States in particular, but the world as a whole is starting to move in this direction, where we go from absolutists saying it's okay to allow a society to have people express things to we're going to start criminalizing and harshly punishing or deplatforming expression. This is an ongoing trend, and it's been happening now for decades, but it's accelerating. It's not staying put or slowing down. And what's happened is a counterculture is starting to form to push back against this aggressive encroachment that is limiting expression. So recently, for example, you saw Elon Musk take over Twitter. And what he's doing is he's starting to re-platform people who were previously deplatformed and creating a kind of a town square and saying instead of deplatforming people, what we're going to do is invest in constructing new methods and tools to add context to the things that they're saying. For example, community notes, which have been used on President Biden and Elon Musk himself, where when you tweet something and it's starting to attract a lot of attention, it's no longer the case that it just is out there. And it's no longer the case that if a person disagrees with it, we just deplatform them. People actually provide additional information and context that in some cases actually disagrees with the statement or adds a little bit more to the truth of the statement. And this can be just as simple as somebody takes a video and only gives you a small snippet, or takes a picture and kind of changes the picture a little bit to look in a certain way. And then the community notes say, hey, wait a minute here. If you watch the full video, they said the opposite. Or if you broaden the picture, all of a sudden you have a very different perspective on the matter. And in general, this is actually, I think, a very healthy development where you add many different viewpoints and contexts overall to the speech. Freedom of speech does not translate to consequence-free speech. If a person says something, even if they have the right to say it, if that is negatively received, there are consequences to it. A great example is me. I recently said that I disagree that Bitcoin and Ethereum enjoy an operational test for their security status, whereas everything else in the altcoin space enjoys a historical test. I think it's categorically wrong as a matter of law and policy. It's senseless. But because I said that, there are many in the Bitcoin space who perceive this as an attack on Bitcoin and have gone out of their way to attack and diminish me, attack my credentials, my honesty, our business, Cardano as an ecosystem. So there are obviously consequences for having an opinion, and there's perceptions of that opinion which were not intended. I don't attack Bitcoin. Bitcoin is Bitcoin. It's a protocol. I don't sit here thinking somehow there's a moral superiority with Cardano to Bitcoin. They're very clearly different ecosystems. They're different generations. There's different use cases. And it's absolutely fair to point out when a regulator has an inconsistent application of the law and contrast the historical reality that is a fact, and contrast the journey that all cryptocurrencies go on from a small group of people to a larger group of people, and if they're doing it right, a progressive decentralization. But there are consequences to pointing that out. You make enemies, and you have to accept those. Truth is not a free concept. Opinions are not free. They carry consequences. Yet, in a free society, we do not criminalize or encourage institutions to destroy people if their opinions disagree with an orthodoxy. We do this in totalitarian societies. A great example would be if any of you watched the Chernobyl miniseries on HBO. There, they perfectly epitomize the consequences of living in a totalitarian regime. The entire Chernobyl disaster was exacerbated by the fact that the Soviet government could not admit that it was a disaster. And therefore, everybody working to try to clean up and restore Chernobyl had to work within the confines of a structure that forced them not to admit how bad it was, which prolonged the suffering and misery and created horrific scenarios. Like, for example, when they purchased a robot from the Germans to try to clean up the graphite that was on the roof of the building, they couldn't give the Germans the right radiation numbers. And when this meant that the robot failed. Thus, the only other option was to send actual human beings to a highly radioactive roof, basically signing a death sentence. So people were so enamored and forced to adhere to the lie that they were willing to let people die knowingly to keep that narrative going. That's the end result of a totalitarian regime. And when you suck the freedom of expression, association, and commerce from a society for too long, that's where you go. Those are the consequences of that. You often see this panic in people's face when you ask them a question where if the answer was to come from first principles, from science or common sense, it would be easy to answer. But instead, they have to freeze and try to remember what the official position of the government is. For example, you can see a propagandist in Russia or North Korea, and you ask them a simple question, and they have to remember what the answer is. They know what the truth is, but they also know if they speak the truth, it's going to have severe and significant consequences. Unfortunately, in modern academia in America and in the media, we seem to be converging towards a more totalitarian view of things, and we have lost inclusive accountability and first principles in our thinking. And this Harvard example is just simply is such an epitome of that. The correct answer, whenever you're asked if saying we should commit a genocide on a particular group, is that a right or wrong thing? And is that harassment of members of that group? It's always wrong. That's the correct answer. You don't really have to think too hard about it. No matter how grievous the sins of a group, systematic murder of all of them, we as humans are past that. And we're never going to do that again as a free and open society. It's always wrong. It's always evil. There's no excuse for it. And if you believe there is one, you're on the wrong side of history. So we just have to learn how to go beyond that. There's no context involved in that. But the fact that you add that is because they've lived in an environment for so long where everything is so politicized and everything is such a game. They have to think for a moment and say the most careful thing possible. So how do we get beyond this? Well, we do it through innovation. And this is what the cryptocurrency space in general allows us to do. Earlier in prior videos, I mentioned things like veracity bonds, where when somebody says something, you ask yourself, are you willing to put money on the table for how confident you are? For example, if somebody says, what's the capital of Colorado? And they say, Colorado Springs. You say, all right, are you confident? Oh, sure. Would you be willing to put $1,000 on the table for that? $10,000, $100,000. And they say, oh, actually, I don't know. Let me look it up. They say, Denver. Say, how confident are you? Well, $10,000. Oh, yeah, of course. I've been there before. $1 million. I think it's Denver, but God, am I really that sure? When you quantify things, when you really put money on the table, you put consequences to being wrong above and beyond the reputational risk and the opinion and discourse, you create marketplaces for truth. Suddenly people get much more careful, systematic, and they really start digging. This is what financial markets do. When you think about trading, hedge funds, you think about the price of something. How confident are you that Microsoft is going to be worth more money next quarter than it is today? You have analysts that dig into everything. They really try to understand technology, and they make fortunes being right or wrong. And lo and behold, some of the most sophisticated analysis, the most sophisticated digging, mathematical models that humankind has ever conceived happens to live in the financial industry, because there's an outcome, an incentive to actually pursue a prediction of the future one way or the other. Same for warfare. If you look at some of the most sophisticated groups of analysis, it exists usually in tier one nations like the United States and China, where they have very sophisticated apparatus to predict and war game the consequences of a conflict, a battle, and the pursuit of their strategy, both in a micro and a macro sense. Because what are the consequences? People die, and you lose national prestige when you lose battles. So, of course, they can still get it wrong, and they often do. People make bad investments, and obviously Iraq and Afghanistan happened in the United States. And yeah, of course, stuff can happen, but it at least says that's better than the baseline. And there's a lot of examples where it went right. So when we look to the 21st century and we talk about the freedom of expression, it behooves us as an industry to really think deeply about what tools and what systems do we need to put together. In some cases, people are so terrified of telling the truth because of the blowback and reputational damage that they don't do it. But when you introduce a whistleblowing system and anonymity, when you have confidentiality that's built in, underground newspapers, people are willing to be a lot more honest. For example, in an organization, you can ask for real life human identity and say, what do you think of the CEO? What do you think of the president? What do you think of the leader? What do you think of the decisions that are made? And they'll have one opinion. If you have an anonymous poll, but you can verify that they are indeed a member of that organization, but no one can see the way people voted, you'll get a radically different answer and a much more honest answer, because people are going to share their actual opinion, not the opinion they think you want to hear. And if you put that on a nation state scale, you put that in your media systems, you put your systems of higher learning, you can already get there. Attach that with economic consequences and marketplaces for truth and AI curation. There's some good things that are going to happen. Why this is relevant is that free societies have a presumption that there are people who are in love with institutions, who are in love with getting to the crucible of truth. And unfortunately, we are moving not only in the opposite direction, we're accelerating by the fact that many institutions have been co-opted, and generative AI is going to create a tsunami of basically fake news. We are living in an age where audio and video and pictures can now be manipulated at a scale we've never seen in human history. Anyone, myself, a president, can be made to say or put in situations that actually didn't happen, but because AI is so sophisticated, it is convincing that they did this. And this could be small and simple things. For example, a celebrity fake phone call could be generated of them yelling at their assistant, or a picture could be generated where they're being aggressive or mean to a fan. These can be big things. For example, things like Pizzagate could actually be married with a video of Hillary Clinton murdering a child or something like that for that sweet, sweet adrenochrome. And the issue is, how do you know fact from fiction? And it's going to get harder year after year with deepfakes and generative AI to truly understand that. The problem is that the naive response to this societal crisis is for the government to construct a ministry of truth and decide what's real and what's not real and tell you what's real and what's not real. Recently, I had some videos taken down by YouTube. YouTube was encouraged by the US government to develop a policy for medical information and say that only things that come from WHO or the CDC are legitimate. Any deviation from that orthodoxy, whether it's true or not, must be deplatformed and taken down. Is that okay? Not in a free society. And a lot of people say, well, they're a private company, a publicly traded company. They can do whatever they want. Well, is it truly a company deciding if the US government is working hand in glove with that institution? In congressional testimony recently, found out that Twitter had a lot of FBI and CIA employees, and they had a direct line with the FBI and worked with them hand in glove to decide on what to deplatform, what not. If Twitter was doing that, it's almost certain that Meta is, and Google is as well. So if the US government is directly and indirectly creating institutions to decide what is true, are they going to decide what is true out of the virtue of their hearts, or what is politically convenient to the people who rule? As case in point, there is no decade in American history we can look to where the US government has not lied about something of substance. From the Gulf of Tonkin to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, to the nature of our foreign policy, to people who were our friends, later our enemies. You can see it every year, every decade, every place. There is a lie somewhere. And if that's the track record, then how can we trust the monopoly of reality and truth to those very same people who are not accountable? Not too long ago, I remember the Director of National Intelligence telling the Congress a lie, and then later on being asked about it and saying he gave the least untruthful answer possible. There were no consequences for that. You and me, we lie to Congress, we suffer that. This is the society we are moving towards. And this yet again shows one of the great use cases and utilities of the cryptocurrency industry. There are really three at the core: consent, identity, and assets. And the extension of that, the consent, so the voting systems, you approving something and being able to verify that, your identity and your data surrounding it, your assets, the extension of that is the preservation and protection of the freedom of association, commerce, and expression. We have to build, as an industry, systems to double down and enhance and protect these things, either to augment existing systems like X and Meta and YouTube, or to build replacement systems for them. Because there's a small window of time before those systems become completely co-opted and controlled by a patchwork of transnational agencies that behoove themselves to control what is true and what is not true. And the things that happen at Harvard, the things that we see have happened in totalitarian regimes, are basically symptoms to that broader problem. And we as an industry are the only industry that the human race has to sort all of this out in a way that preserves those things. One of the worst things you can witness is a society that does not have freedom of expression. It is the bedrock of humanity and creativity. And you slowly darken and suck the humanity out of every single person when people are afraid to express themselves. You lose genuineness, you lose luster, And ultimately, you lose everything that makes life special. I travel to a lot of different countries. I've been to now 74. I've been to very free places. I've been to very unfree places. When I go to totalitarian countries, some of them have very impressive infrastructure, beautiful buildings. They have remarkable monuments. They have a lot of wealth that they can show. But there's something missing there. The people, they're damaged because they don't have freedom. And there's always a subconscious lingering fear that all that they have can be taken away. For example, when you look at Jack Ma, when I was young, saw his meteoric rise and all the articles written, the magazine covers he was on. He's one of the most powerful and important people in China. Now he's a non-person because he ran afoul of a dictator. That's what happens in these types of regimes. And there is no laws of physics that say somehow, some way, this can't happen in a free country like the United States or the European Union and their members like Germany and France, former members like the UK. Absolutely can. And it is happening real time. We're only ever one generation away from living in a totalitarian society. So just remember, when people talk about these things, it's not you pick a particular side, you're supporting Israel or you're supporting Palestine. Perhaps that was the intention of the Congresswoman. It's not really my intention, and frankly, it misses the entire broader point. It really is a question of, do you believe in freedom of expression or not? And do you believe we should invest and promote systems that enhance freedom of expression and augment freedom of expression and allow us to get to a more objective reality that is inclusive? Or do we want to build systems to remove truth and force an agenda? That's one of the reasons why I'm in the cryptocurrency space, is that I would like to do the former. I honestly believe there has never been an invention in human history that is as liberating as blockchain technology, for the reason that we can get consent back to the masses. We can be in control of our own identity through self-sovereign identity constructs. And by being our own bank and being able to host our own assets and own those assets, that enables us to preserve and protect the freedom of association, the freedom of commerce, and the freedom of expression. The more we do this, the more you'll see governments try to crack down. Recently, Elizabeth Warren just proposed legislation that would effectively end the entire U.S. cryptocurrency industry as we know it, should it pass. Now, we're lucky that she's only passed one bill out of 350 that she's proposed, so not a particularly effective lawmaker, but it is a harrowing thing to see lawmakers actually believe it's a good idea to destroy the movement that actually preserves and protects the intent of the U.S. Constitution and the broader liberty movement, which the world deserves. So thank you for all being part of cryptocurrency, and thank you for listening. But the takeaway from this video is that we got a lot of work to do, and we have to still fight. And it is important for each and every one to really understand what freedom of expression means. Doesn't mean consequence-free speech. It just means that you have the ability to do it. And a society has the ability to absorb that in a way where we all learn together. And I'd highly encourage you to listen to Greg's interview on Lex Fridman. And I'd highly encourage you to go to thefire.org, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and take a look at some of their material on their free speech rankings. From our part at IO, we build ventures, and definitely down the pipeline at some point, we're going to be heavily involved and invested in systems that preserve and protect these such things, and also try to create systems where we have much better ways of understanding the media around us and the world around us without having to rely on a Ministry of Information. And for your part, I absolutely assume that people are going to work with us, partner with us, and use such services. But we're only one small cog in a larger machine, and the industry as a whole has to keep doing this. And whenever we see clear-cut examples of where expression has been censored or silenced, like, for example, Harvard's score of 0 on the index, that's not something to excuse away as partisan politics. It's an example that the institutions we trust to preserve and protect these things are no longer the institutions we can rely upon. And it's time for us to build some new institutions. Thank you all for listening. Cheers.